traditions and songs, and to be
Yeah,
masked.
but how would they get the information in the first place? Haiti is an island of San Dome, the Dominican Republic.
Right.
So how would Africans in Georgia, Mississippi, and Virginia, and Florida get news of the Haitian Revolution? How would that have happened?
I mean, so that I thought would be travelers, because sometimes you will have travelers, especially African travelers coming from various places, who may interact with slaves on some levels and some accords and be able to give those stories. And I do know we do have accounts of African travelers who were seen as troublemakers, who were ran off of plantations and ran away from areas because they were giving slaves information, or enslaved people information, that the slave masters didn't want them to have because it would empower the people.
Okay.
So from those travelers.
You notice I did in the webinar Friday night, excuse me, I showed a picture you pour drinks from Massachusetts in 1840. And it was in the image of Toussaint L'Ouverture, one of the greatest leaders of the Haitian liberation struggle. And I wondered, this was in a museum in North Carolina, but it was from somebody owned it in Massachusetts. And I couldn't help but wonder how they would have known about that. And did it belong to a Haitian household? Or who I know that there are a lot of Haitians in Boston and around that area today. But all of it tells me how little we actually know. We know a lot, but in the overall scheme of things, how little we actually know about our own history and what we did and the details of it. And it's fascinating to me.
Yeah, that is true, because like you say, we do have details, but just we really don't know how many details are left out of the full story. We really don't know how vast it is or how deep it is. And it's just amazing. So I love when we get to learn new things, get to digging and collaborating with different people and trading information, and you learn new things, and you can add more pieces to the story and see how the puzzle starts to come together.
Let's talk about another form of resistance, and that is, I guess you would call it Maroonage, or the Maroon communities. Now, resistance took different forms. It could take the form of running away. It could take the form of doing bodily injury to the slave owner or slave master, whatever word we want to use. It could take something as simple as coming late, which we seem to have adopted too well. Insurrection, that's what the Haitian Revolution was. They rose up and they had a planned insurrection. But another form of resistance were Maroon communities. And the Maroons, or Seminoles, were Africans who ran away from the plantations and haciendas and developed their own communities, and in some cases, their own states. In the case of Palmares in Brazil, we might even say their own republic. What do you know about the Maroons? And then we'll talk about some of the great Maroon leaders.
So I first learned about the Maroons through learning about the Seminoles, since I'm here in Florida.
Let's start with the Seminoles. Introduce us to the Seminoles.
So the Seminoles were a group that was a Maroon community. It was a Maroon community. It was a mixed community, from my understanding, of enslaved Africans who escaped and Native Americans from the area. Not sure of the specific groups of Native Americans, but from my understanding, a mix of Africans and Native Americans who created this Maroon community in Florida.
Do they teach that in the schools in Florida?
No, they don't. No, they don't. We only learn about Juan Ponce de Leon. I have no idea why, but so doing my own research, I learned that about the Seminoles, learned more about how the communities were created, how they come together. Then I learned the word Seminole was an adoption, or I guess you could say a different version of Maroon. Because the Seminole Maroon community. So from my understanding, the word Seminole comes from, it's a version of that. Africans, Native Americans, and one of the most famous of the Seminoles was John Horse, the black Seminole John Horse, who was a leader in the Seminole community, helped to lead against some rebellions. He made some moves that didn't necessarily help his people overall, but he was able to redeem himself in some of the actions and helping his people become free. But
so you would say John Horse is the greatest of the Seminoles?
I wouldn't say he's the greatest. I would say he's the most famous.
Okay.
He's the most known. I don't have enough information on the Seminoles to say which one is the greatest or not, because I'm still looking for more information on the Seminoles. But what I do know is John Horse, in connection with Chief Osceola and some of the other well-known Indian chiefs, were the ones who were leading resistance or rebellions against the Europeans who were trying to enslave them as well as the Africans.
Another very powerful brother is a brother named Kofi Abraham.
Okay.
And the name Kofi tells us, his Ghanaian roots. Wouldn't this make a marvelous story? Our history is so magnificent, but it's so little known. Now, I believe that knowledge of this would just transform us dramatically, transform the way we see ourselves, insist on a transformation of the way people see us. And so there's a reason that this information is suppressed. And it's so exciting to be able to dig out these, what I call missing pieces in African history. So Kofi Abraham, Osceola, John Horse were some bad African Native Americans who lived in Florida, whose story needs to be told.
Right. Like I say, it's not told at all in these parts. I'm in Tallahassee, is the capital of Florida, and it doesn't happen here. So that's why I'm so adamant about getting the information out, and that's why I'm always appreciative of the time to be able to share with you and learn more and give more information, because I want my people here and everywhere else to really understand how great our history is, and especially on a subject like this, looking at learning about Dos Palmares and learning about San Basilio de Palenque, learning about places like that, learning about Yanga, who Gaspar Yanga helped to create, learning about the different Maroon communities in the Caribbean, up in the mountains and things that they were able to create, strategically placed to help them resist the Europeans coming in, strategically placed to make it difficult for the Europeans to even reach them, because they knew the land and they was able to use that knowledge and the resources that they had to sustain themselves and even protect themselves.
Well, let's talk about some of these folk, and let's talk about the communities that they established. Before we get to Brazil and Zumbi and Palmares, let's talk about the first generation of African resistance leaders that we know of. We have, for example, you've already mentioned San Palenque de Basilio, or San Basilio de Palenque, I think it actually is. This is regarded, I don't know how accurate it is, as the first town of free Africans in the Americas. And it's not far from Cartagena, Colombia. It's still a thriving community. And it was led by a brother named Bincos Biojo, in what is now Guinea-Bissau. And on the flyer, that's who we use, the person reaching up for freedom. And then you have a contemporary of his that I've never been able to get a photograph of, a brother named Bayano in Panama.
King Bayano.
Do you know much about him?
Yes. Let me share my screen. So to show you this, I wrote about King Bayano in my second book, but I want to share my screen. Let me see if I have this up right. Is it going to let me share this? I don't think it's going to let me share it, but I do have information on King Bayano. So what I come across is he was enslaved, and he was on a slave ship to be transported. He was being transported into the Americas, and there was a shipwreck close off the island of St. Vincent. And Bayano was one of the people to survive the shipwreck off of the coast of St. Vincent. He was able to integrate into the culture with the people of St. Vincent. We're talking about the beginning of the creation of the Garifuna culture. Was able to just integrate itself and become a part of the people, and they were able to build a culture and fight. Were some of the first to resist the European advances coming in, and Bayano was able to help fight off European resistance from St. Vincent on over to Honduras, because eventually the Garifuna people were pushed into Honduras, but from St. Vincent to Honduras, being able to fight off resistance.
So Panama itself, which is connected to Colombia, had many Maroon communities with African names. So we've talked about Bayano, and we've talked about Biincas, Biojo, but the other, I think the third great resistance leader, Maroon leader, you've already mentioned, is Yanga. Caspar Yanga lived in Mexico, and he seems to have been of royal birth.
Yes.
And he led to the abolition of slavery in Mexico, at least at that time. So this is the first generation. So bottom line is African people were fighting from the beginning. And I think that these are heroic figures. Now, possibly the greatest Maroon community is in Palmares in Brazil. And the great leader is not one of the original Africans who were landed as a result of enslavement, but he comes later, generations later, and that is Zumbi. You want to share a bit about Zumbi? And of course, we're going to talk about all this Friday night and Saturday morning.
So Zumbi, like Yanga, from my information, comes from royal lineage of Angola. I think his mother was kidnapped. His mother, and I know parts of the royal family, but I think it was his mother specifically who was a part of the kidnapping, brought to America. So he was born here, but he was
of royal birth.
Right. He became a part of Dos Palmares. He was kidnapped at the age of I believe he was either kidnapped at the age of 15, or 15 is when he escaped from slavery. And I believe at the age of 15 he escaped from slavery, because he himself over here was enslaved. And
have you written about Zumbi, or is there a book or reference? And which book is that? We want people to see your work and purchase your work.
Zumbi is in my third book. This book. So let me go to it, because I believe So it says, okay, at the age of 6, Zumbi was kidnapped from Dos Palmares by the Portuguese and given to priest Antonio Melo as a slave. Priest Melo began to indoctrinate Zumbi within the ways of Catholicism by baptizing him and changing his name to Francisco, teaching him the sacraments, teaching him Latin as well as Portuguese, and making him participate in mass. At the age of 15, Zumbi escaped slavery and returned to Dos Palmares to be with his people. He learned and eventually mastered the martial art of capoeira and combining the African elements of dance, aerobics, and music. So at the age of 15, he was able to escape from the enslavement of the Catholic priest.
Well, tell us a bit about Palmares itself.
So Palmares was one of the most well-known and one of the biggest areas of the whole Palenque. And it was one of the most successful ones because Zumbi himself, for a period of about 15 years, was able to successfully defend Palmares and keep Palmares safe from the intrusion of the Dutch and the Portuguese that were trying to overrun them. It was a huge settlement in Brazil. It was another one of those places that was those settlements that was strategically placed that gave them an advantage to be able to protect themselves and made it harder for the Europeans to reach them. So I need to learn more about it, but that is some of the information that I know about Palmares.
You know, Zumbi is the great national hero for Black people in Brazil.
Yes.
And he was captured in November, the month of November, I forget the year. First of all, Palmares itself lasted for 100 years. Imagine that. 100 years of a Black republic in South America that the Dutch, the Portuguese, the English were not able to crack. Eventually, and it wasn't the only Maroon community. Eventually, he is captured, and now Black History Month in Brazil is basically the month of November. And I wonder, I started to ask the question, but I think I know the answer and won't bother, how much Zumbi is known about in Brazil itself. In Cuba, for example, you had a sister, I was just talking about her, Carlota Lucami.
Yes.
She led a revolt, or attempted to lead a revolt, in Matanzas province in 1843. And I don't even think I'm not sure she's taught about it in the history books, but I don't think most Black people in Cuba even know about it.
Right. Yeah, I think she would be one whose information would be suppressed because how much they feared the revolt that was happening, even though they wasn't able to get as far as they wanted to. But she just comes off like the way the information is about her. It just comes off as somebody who is an intimidating presence for them still to this day. And if they really teach these African people in Cuba about Carlota, these African people might not be so docile.
No, I don't know if the sisters and brothers in that part of the world are docile, but certainly we need to know this history. So this is what I'm going to talk about Friday and Saturday. I'm going to talk about the invasions of Africa, the scattering of Africa's children as a result of enslavement. We're going to talk about the key is resistance to that. And then an offshoot of that is the evolution of Pan-Africanism, the vision that we are all in this together, and where that takes us. So how do you want to wind down, my brother?
Well, I kind of touching a bit on Pan-Africanism. From your perspective, kind of what is Pan-Africanism and why is it important? Why do you feel like it's important for us to practice?
Pan-Africanism is the global unity of African people. And to me, it's absolutely essential that we need Africa. Africa needs us. And I don't know if African Americans will ever be powerful until Africa is powerful. And I don't think Africa will be powerful until African Americans get involved in the African liberation struggle. Now, what we have been talking about is Africans, not just in the United States, but Africans throughout the diaspora as a result of enslavement. We could also say that there's power in numbers. So we're going to talk about people like Marcus Garvey. And then we're going to go back to Africa itself and talk about people like Kwame Nkrumah and Patrice Lumumba. One of the things that all of these interviews is telling me is that we haven't really effectively told our story, that we've had bits and pieces handed down to us from other folk who don't have our best interests at heart. So I think that what you're doing on the shoulders of giants is magnificent. And I want to help facilitate that. And I think the webinars that we're doing at the end of the month and the other webinars are so important because we've taken the initiative to tell our story from our perspective without stuttering, stammering, apologizing, and whispering.
Look, the webinars you give are excellent. So I will say, I do have another podcast. It's called the Freedom Train Podcast Series. It's something I've been doing for a while. And my co-host and he had to give me 5 minutes because I had to have a rant yesterday when we recorded. And because I was thinking about all the work that you do, all the work that Professor Browder does, Hunter Adams, all of our great scholars. Like we have, you gentlemen have, and even the ladies have done an excellent job of setting a foundation for us to be able to carry this information on to the future. So we have, on one hand, people who are upset that the white people don't want to teach critical race theory. But on the other hand, we have a number of people who are not accessing the information that's available. So I had to have a bit of a rant about that because I want people to access this information. This is some of the best information you're going to get on us telling our stories, people. This is, excellent information from especially a gentleman like Dr. Rashidi, but all of our scholars who take the time to research the information to make sure that we have knowledge of self, that we can learn about ourselves, we can learn about our past, we can learn about our history. Take advantage of the information. Take advantage of it. We don't need anybody else to teach us about us when we already have our brilliant scholars teaching us about ourselves. That was kind of part of my rant because I want us to empower ourselves by learning about ourselves, because I feel like you guys have done a great job of giving us this information, and it's up to us to use it.
Well, you're 37 years old. I'd like to see you in a lot of ways as my successor.
Yes, sir.
Somebody that I could turn a lot of my materials and archives and photographs over. How do you feel about the future of African people? Are you discouraged? Are you encouraged? Where are you at in terms of where we're going and the direction that we're leaning in?
I am overall encouraged. Within my group of friends, I'm known as the more optimistic one. So I am encouraged. To be honest, there are times where I do have discouragement. There are times where I feel like I just don't know how we're going to get from point A to point B. But overall, I believe in my people. I believe in us as Black people. I believe in our spirit. I believe in our culture, our ancestry. And I do believe that we can get to where we need to go. We can achieve whatever we want to achieve. It's just up to us to just put it all together and make it happen.